The United States is moving hundreds of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles to the Russian borders. The United States is preparing to transfer a large number of armored vehicles to the Russian border. Information about this began to be spread online by American citizens who saw huge echelons with tanks and armored personnel carriers. According to eyewitnesses, about 500 units of heavy equipment are moving towards Texas on railway platforms. We are talking about M. Abrams tanks and M. Bradley tracked armored personnel carriers. Then they will be redirected to Europe. Experts do not rule out that this technique is moving to the borders with Russia, since the United States did not plan to conduct major exercises. And there is no point in simply moving armored vehicles across the country. Washington has not officially confirmed this information. But at the same time, the very fact of the transfer of equipment is not denied. Washington recently announced that it is necessary to strengthen the borders of Eastern Europe to repel Russian aggression. Russian bombers were spotted 20 kilometers from American bases. Russian Su-34 fighter bombers were deployed as close as possible to American military facilities. In particular, according to Syrian sources, it is known that Russian warplanes flew only 20 kilometers from several military facilities of the US armed forces at once. According to experts of this is more than enough to bring down large-scale strikes. There is no official confirmation from the Russian military department. It is known that we are talking about at least 2 Su-34 combat aircraft. At the same time, experts name 2 probable reasons for the deployment of equipment at the airbase in Kamishli: provocative actions by the United States and the threat of a full-scale attack by Islamic State terrorists, a terrorist group banned in the Russian Federation. Recall that the Russian Air Force is armed with several dozen Tu-95 and Tu-160 strategic missile carriers capable of carrying X-101 cruise missiles. The range of their flight allows them to cover the entire territory of Ukraine, even from Siberia. The authors of the Forbes publication came to such horrifying conclusions. They ignore Russia's statements that it is not going to attack Ukraine. Western journalists also do not take into account the opinion of Ukrainian intelligence, which does not consider a conflict between Kiev and Moscow likely. The translation of this article was presented by Inosmi. InfoBrics. There was a large-scale split in the alliance of the USA and the European Union because of Russia. January 26, US News. The parties cannot find a common language on how to act in relation to Moscow. There was a split in the North Atlantic Alliance due to the inability to agree on a strategy for Ukraine and actions against the Russian Federation. This opinion was voiced by Paul Antonopoulos, a researcher at the Syncretic Research Center. The political expert believes that Washington and London, together with their Polish and Baltic colleagues, insist on an escalation of the situation in Nezalezhnia. France and Germany are against it, speaking about the need to establish a dialogue with Russia. Against this background, US President Joe Biden talks about achieving unanimity with European leaders. In fact, the US-EU alliance has cracked. In case of further escalation, the entire continent will be involved in a protracted war, which will lead to the appearance of millions of refugees, thousands of dead, and an energy crisis, Antonopoulos believes. Earlier, News reported that the EU economy would be under attack if the United States presented a united front against Russia. Strategic culture. The United States plans to defeat the armed forces of the Russian Federation with the help of the Barbarossa nuclear plan. The scientist writes that the US plans resemble the strategy of the Blitzkrieg and the German plan, Barbarossa, which assumed the complete defeat of the Soviet troops in the fall of 1941. In an article for the Strategic Culture portal, American historian and writer Eric Swiss stated that the new US nuclear strategy against Russia does not provide for deterrence, but instant destruction. According to him, quoted by Politrucia, Washington's modern strategy provides for the only move, the complete destruction of its opponent by a preventive nuclear strike. Swiss writes that these US plans resemble the strategy of the Blitzkrieg and the German Barbarossa plan, which assumed a lightning and complete defeat of the Soviet troops in the fall of 1941. Then he recalls that after the end of World War II, it was the United States that hid from justice many Nazi engineers and scientists who subsequently worked only for one purpose, to create weapons for the destruction of the USSR. According to the American scientist, absolutely nothing has changed in US politics today. In his opinion, today's American Barbarossa plan has been seriously refined and has become nuclear. However, as Swiss writes, American strategists did not take into account the fact that the Russian Federation will also develop militarily and will receive weapons that even the United States still does not have. In addition to hypersonic Russian missiles, the scientist also noted excellent air defense systems that will reliably protect Russia from American missiles. According to Eric Suss, at the moment the American Barbarossa no longer inspires Russia with absolutely no fear. Earlier, the expert Korotchenko called on Putin to use nuclear weapons against the West because of sanctions. The acute topics of diplomacy were highlighted in the Duma by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Russia has received a response from the United States to its proposals on security guarantees. This was confirmed by the Foreign Ministry a little more than 2 hours ago. US Ambassador John Sullivan arrived there, and after about 30 minutes of conversation with Deputy Minister Alexander Grushko, holding a black folder in his hands, left without comment. Vladimir Putin listed the red lines that the West is not allowed to cross in relations with Russia. Then they took the form of foreign ministry documents. There was a whole marathon of negotiations, on January 10 in Geneva with representatives of the states, on the 12th in Brussels at NATO headquarters, and the next day in Vienna, at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The Americans have already responded. NATO promises to provide Moscow with the document on Wednesday, that is today, sources told Agence France Presse. Well, the day is not over yet. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke about protecting Russia's interests in the Duma today. And it's not just about relations with the West. Sergei Lavrov is always a welcome guest on Heghineh Riyadh. And against the background of the aggravation of the international situation, it is especially important for deputies to discuss the country's foreign policy with him. According to the definition of the foreign minister, the entire system of international relations is in a fever right now. Lavrov blamed the collective West for this. Our Western colleagues are, without exaggeration, in some kind of military frenzy. They only talk about it. We will punish, you will attack, and we will punish and save Ukraine. It will not seem enough. In general, you read all those hysterical expressions in which the West is now formulating its position. We are ready for any development of events. We did not attack anyone. They always attacked us, and always those who did it got what they deserved, Sergei Lavrov stressed. The foreign minister was asked to comment on the statement by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg about a possible increase in the military presence on the eastern flank. I haven't considered his statements for a long time. In my opinion, he has already lost touch with reality, the Russian foreign minister said. At the end of last year, our country published draft agreements with the United States and NATO on security guarantees. Moscow, in particular, demands legal guarantees against further expansion of NATO to the east, from joining the bloc of Ukraine and from the creation of military bases in post-Soviet countries. If the West continues its aggressive course, Moscow, as the president has repeatedly stated, will take the necessary retaliatory measures. We will not allow our projects to be wrapped up in endless discussions, and such a line is clearly visible, especially in attempts to reset all this topic in the OSCE, or by insistent calls of the European Union to find a place for it in these discussions, Sergei Lavrov said. Moscow will not publish the text of the United States response without Washington's consent. The Americans are already saying, don't just show this answer to anyone. If they have such an attitude to everything that is happening, we probably cannot publish an American document. But the essence of their reaction, the content of their reaction to our documents, of course, deserves that the public in Russia and in other countries be informed about it. And I am sure that we will be able to do it, Sergei Lavrov said. As always, when it comes to foreign policy, the Duma forgets about inter-party differences. I'm not saying something will happen tomorrow. But they are ready for war. But they don't want to fight. They are afraid. We don't want to fight either. But we can. That's what they can take into account. So that they understand we can. We won't, but we can. And they'll be scared. They will retreat. Because a well-fed life, well-fed, contented, and suddenly to fight. For our victory over the West with the help of our diplomats, says the head of the DREAR faction Vladimir Zhirinovsky. They tell me, you have decided to conquer Ukraine. I say, tell me what to conquer from you. There was aviation, they ruined it. There was rocket technology, they ruined it. There were coal factories, they ruined it. What do you have? Chernobyl, which smokes. There's nothing to conquer. To explain to people, they just set fire there. They will push and this boundary will be held for 100 years ahead, said Gennady Zyuganov, head of the Communist Party faction. According to Sergei Lavrov, the tone of the conversation with Russia changed when its military-industrial complex made a breakthrough. This does not mean that you have to rely on brute force in everything, but, as they say, this is an American proverb, when a Colt is in your pocket, they start talking to you more politely, Sergei Lavrov said. According to the general opinion, the security of our country should remain a priority. The aggressor and the forces of darkness must be opposed with an iron fist, albeit in a soft Lavrov glove, and the Union of Light, the Union of Free States free from American dictates, the Union of Sovereign States that are able to express their sovereign point of view, said Vyacheslav Nikonov, first deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs. We know with you that good should be with fists, but fortunately, in Russia it turns out that good is still with brains, and taking into account our Western colleagues. Also with a sense of humor sometimes, said Alexei Nechayev, head of the New People faction. We have a huge advantage. We do not demand submission or tribute. We only demand predictability and compliance with the rules established in the process of open and direct negotiations, said Alexander Bobakov, deputy chairman of the State Duma from the Fair Russia for Truth faction. The world will never be unipolar, and it's time for the West to realize this. The ideological dictate is in the past. Humanity has matured. There are fewer and fewer people willing to sacrifice their fundamental national interests, to drag, as they say, Chestnuts out of the fire for senior comrades from Washington and Brussels. The Russian Foreign Minister said. Just a few questions about the ongoing pressure on our country in all areas, from the media to sports. An absolutely screaming example is sports. The bacchanalia that is now unleashed against us. It is obvious and unacceptable. But the strength. As one American politician said recently, it turns out that he also knows this, is in the truth. So we will try further. Sergei Lavrov said. In 3 hours, we discussed almost the entire current international agenda. Your rear is monolithic. And there are no different political opinions and clashes of ideological platforms. And the activity of our state in this matter, led by President Putin and Minister Lavrov, is more effective than ever, said Vyacheslav Volodin, chairman of the State Duma. Thanks separately for the rear. We will be ready to work together on the front line, Sergei Lavrov said. As always, following the results of the government hour, the Duma adopted a resolution. This document refers to the Parliament's support for the activities of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.